Hi and welcome. I'm Jesse Cruickshank. Joining me today is the one, the only Andrew Arnold. And
Yes.
so I'm so excited to introduce Andrew to all of you out there. If you've been listening to me for a while or following me for a while, you have heard me talk about the wilderness ministry. And if I were smart and tech able, there would be sound effects every time I said that. Like I would have a button that I would push, and there would be a wolf
Uh,
howl or coyotes chipping or an eagle, no, an eagle, an elk bugle. I think,
there you go.
you like the elk bugle there. But Andrew is the person. Andrew and Josh are who I co-led the wilderness ministry. So the wilderness ministry has a name. Well, it is Solid Rock Outdoor Ministries, affectionately known as SROM, SROM, which is the acronym there. So Andrew is my brother in the Lord, and we have served together for a very long time in the good, the bad, a lot of the ugly, and we cut our teeth together in full-time ministry at the ripe old ages of 22, 23, 24.
Yes. Wow. Wow.
Babies. Then you were babies having babies. But yeah, so I'm so excited to introduce you to our audience. And Andrew, I let me just kind of start with giving you the opportunity to just share a little bit about what Solid Rock does and the wilderness ministry, and kind of how we thought about discipleship there from the beginning. Discovered, fell into, led by the Lord. But yeah, maybe
Yeah.
introduce the ministry and the paradigm of the ministry to
Yeah,
the
that's
to our
awesome.
audience.
Yeah. Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to be with you as always. Just to
Mm.
be in conversation and have that connection and just talk about things that are important to our hearts, things that we value, things that are meaningful and significant, transcendent, if you will.
Yes.
That's always a joy, and always brings joy to my heart to be able to do that. So it's great to be here and great to be with your audience. Um, yeah, and a little bit about Solid Rock Outdoor Ministries. I don't know how much you shared on the podcast, but it was a ministry started by my dad in 1983, so 41 years ago.
Yeah.
And really, his vision, the vision he felt like the Lord gave him, was that the wilderness would be a context for people to come and be equipped, well, to either come to know the Lord for the first time, so like this evangelistic bent and
Yeah.
perspective or focus, and or if they know the Lord, to come and grow in their connection, their relationship, deepen their their followership or their discipleship of Jesus because of their time in the wilderness. And then because of that deepening of discipleship or that connection to Christ for the first time, they would then go back to their communities and be points of light. That is to say, they would bring what God deposited in their hearts in the wilderness. They bring that DNA, if you will, they bring that insight, that revelation, and influence their spheres of community. They would become leaders of light or points of light, points of influence in their communities. And that was really the original vision that my dad felt like the Lord gave him. And we've been doing that ever since. Essentially, we've been bringing people from all over the country and all over the world to go on wilderness, we call them wilderness ministry trips, to be equipped, to be discipled, to grow and deepen in the revelation of who God is, who Jesus is, who the Holy Spirit is, and then take what's deposited in them by the Trinity in the wilderness and go back to their communities. And it's always been what we would call experiential. That is to say, it's always something that a person experiences at like a heart, soul, spirit level. And when you experience something, when you know that you know, then you can never really forget that. You can never not
It's
remember
really
what
hard. It's
God did.
really hard to unlearn an epiphany.
It's very
Super
challenging.
hard. Yeah.
And so so you and I are very passionate about this, but the model is experiential discipleship. It's experiential, not just education, but it's experiential discipleship. So it's experienced more than it's just taught. It's not just informational. It's like this. It's a felt sense of reality. And so that's always been really meaningful because people have contacted us, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, and said that trip, that time I encountered God, that time I heard God for the first time, that time I um, got out of my comfort zone, that time I took that step of faith, that time I trusted, whatever it may be that they did in the wilderness, that became like that Ebenezer, that memorial stone that shaped me and like shaped a trajectory of my life for the next season of life, or even that some people say for the rest of my life. So it's really
Yeah.
pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I think one of the things for me, realizing how spoiled we were and how spoiled you
Right.
continue to sit in that environment and to see, wow, every person on this course, or almost everybody, like there are people who don't get impacted that way, but they're very few, and they have to work really hard to
Yeah.
not be impacted
Sure.
substantially in a way that changes their life forever. To just see that on every course with every person who comes, and to just know how universally possible it is
Yeah.
when we allow the Holy Spirit to be in charge and we partner with that. I mean, we can talk through some of the things that we do to that we learned about how to partner with that, but to like I took it for granted that of course everyone experiences discipleship this way. Of course everyone experiences
Right.
life change. And as instructors, we had an ethic and a value, a part of also going through all the exercises, right? So when you
Right.
do a devo, when you do a reflection exercise, you participate fully in that,
Yep.
which means you're getting changed every course as well. So we just
That's
had
exactly right.
this amazing accelerated immersion um experience, epiphany every course.
Yeah.
uh you know
Truly.
and yeah, I got spoiled, and I didn't know how unique it was. Like, I think that's one of the things that has been shocking to me ever since the Lord moved me down to Denver, is just how rare that can be for other
Mm.
people when I know
Wow.
how possible and commonplace it could be
Yeah.
for disciple
Yeah.
making communities.
Yeah.
So it's not like we were magical or anointed, or
No.
I think we're anointed, but like it's not like we were young. We didn't know what we were doing. So
Right.
it's
Well,
not like we had
exactly.
an earned, profound anointing that some other people can carry.
Right.
So it wasn't us. Like we can be sure of that. We've seen ourselves. So what do you think about, like, what are some of the things that you learned in being in this, and convictions that you've developed, um
Yeah.
yeah, that maybe the
Well,
rest of the
yeah,
world
there's so
needs to
many.
know
I
is
mean, there
possible?
is so many. And I resonate with what you're sharing of like, wow, I didn't realize one how um like special the context was that we're in, and how it can be challenging to transfer some of that what happened to other more traditional settings of discipleship. So that's some of what I'm hearing with what you're saying. It's like, okay, we were experiencing this in the wilderness, and yet, and it seems like there are at times it's challenging to then reproduce that in other more common or traditional settings of maybe like a small group setting or a church setting or a men's group setting or a women's group, that kind of thing. And I hear that. And I'm also very passionate about how to do this, at my local church level. How
Right.
do I include myself in um, communities of faith and discipleship to be a participant and to be um, maybe a facilitator or a co-facilitator with other people and the Holy Spirit. So there's always this dynamic of how do I enter in fully
Mhm.
and wholeheartedly, and
Yeah.
then also know that I'm wanting to be intentional with the time and the space for other people as well. So I mean, honestly, I think at one basic level, to answer your question is like, how do I and how do we cultivate humility to enter into spaces to say, I'm going to be discipled by you as much as I'm going to be a discipler of you. So, in a sense, like, how do we co
Yeah.
create or co join one another with mutuality? Even if the relationship at some level isn't entirely mutual, maybe that's based on age, Maybe that's based on experience. Maybe that's based on even, honestly, sometimes position and roles, as you know, based because of churches and whatnot. So maybe the relationship isn't entirely mutual, but how do we enter in such a space with humility that says, I can receive from my son who's a teenager as much as I can receive from a man or a woman who's 60 or 70 in the church that's been walking with the Lord for 40, 50 years. And I think the key there is humility, and it's recognizing that beautiful verse in scripture that says, this we all have that Christ came to reveal this great mystery, which is what? Christ in you, the hope of glory, that you as a believer carry Christ. My son who's 16 carries Christ. Older couple in the church who's 70 or 80 carry Christ. And every time I'm with you or with them, there's an opportunity for Christ to come through them and minister to me. And so do I have the awareness, the attunement, the humility to say, oh, that's Christ. I want to pay attention to that.
Well, that's so good
And
because your
then,
dad
and
taught
then
us that,
when Christ
right?
is coming through me, to say, oh, I sense this is Christ coming through me to them. And whether they want to receive or not, that's their choice, but it's not me. I can kind of like remove myself at some degree from that and say, hey, this is Christ. I don't need to take credit for this or, you know, be
Be
uh
offended if you don't listen.
be offended if you don't listen or have my identity overly connected to whether or not you're responding to Christ in me. Anyway, so that's a lot, but those are some initial thoughts.
No, that's so good because, like I was saying, your dad taught me that
Yeah,
being, positionally the chair of the board and mentoring, and yet he had his bad days, and so he was receptive to receiving. And so, there was a mutuality. It was the first time I was introduced to mutuality in
yeah,
that dynamic and in that relationship. And yeah, it wasn't entirely mutual, but yeah, he was willing to receive from me. And like I
right.
said, it's the first time I was introduced to that concept. But then as you were talking, it was making me think of, like, how many times in my head I would be so mad at you because like, organizationally, logistically, like, something was super frustrating me, and yet I learned, and I had a practice of separating that relationship from when Christ would minister to me through you, right?
Yeah,
So I could, dude, we were so, like, raw and unpolished that it was easy to tell the self
totally.
or the flesh or the human part from the Christ part. And so while I would fight you on the human part, could totally receive and be received from you in the Christ part.
Yeah,
And that both, and I mean, it's a bit of a differentiation. And I think when we're less mature, it's more obvious, or
yeah,
in immaturity, it becomes super obvious,
yeah,
which is fine. It's fine.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, learn that practice that Jesus could speak through us and minister to our souls and each other, even while we may be going at it and being, like, on different pages on something organizationally, organizational
totally.
management dynamic,
Well, I'll give
right?
you an example. Just last night, I was with a group of guys, two other guys. We meet weekly. They're guys in my church, and one of them was sharing some things. He was processing some things, and he'd been holding some really hard things. It was really
Mm,
challenging. Some of it was related to the church, some of it was related to my leadership, some of it was related to people I really care about, some of it was related to him. And he's processing all this. And as he's sharing, I'm like going through like these self checks of like, okay, I need to clarify with him what he just said there. I'm feeling defensive now about what he said. What's going on there for me? Oh wow, that's Christ in him. I need to receive that even though I'm feeling defensive. And 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 so we work through that together. We talk through that together. And in the end, to your point, he could have his perspective and what he experienced. I could differentiate it from my perspective and what I experienced. I could glean from what Christ was sharing to me from him. And I could say, and we disagree on some things, and that's okay. Because some of it was his own, for lack of a better word, immaturity, his delivery, his own stuff that he's working with that was impacting me. And I don't need to own that. I don't need to take responsibility for that. And it's just what you said. It's like there's the humanness and there's the Christ, And it all can come together in one package, and it's like slowing down, being humble, receiving, and also not being overly being more curious than uh, judgmental, or more curious than defensive, to say, now what exactly does he mean by that? I want to know more, because I think there's something there, but my temptation is to just put up a wall right now. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, to me, totally. But because it's a different type of repair, right? It's
Yeah,
not a repair that we 100% got on the same page and agreed, but we
right.
can at least see reality from each other. And what it was just
Yes,
making me think of, as I can imagine who you might be talking to, um,
right.
is that I just realized this. So this is like a real time thing. And every time we talk, I realize all the assumptions the big amazing assumptions I had when we were young and in ministry. I never
Right.
questioned anybody's heart.
Yeah.
So I'm realizing that right now. Like if I'm thinking about who you're talking about, and being like, of course I want to receive from them. Like I trust their heart. I
Yeah.
trust their love. It may be imperfect love. It may be immature love. But like if I think about you, I think about your family, I think about Josh, I even think about our instructors.
Yeah.
I never was suspicious of their heart.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can
It's a really good
yeah.
point.
And so there was always an impetus and a value in sorting through that,
Yeah.
right? Because of course I wanted to receive what was Christ in you. Of course I did. Of course it was worth it to sort through and differentiate and figure out what's my stuff and what's your stuff I don't need, and what is God talking to us and shaping us through each other. So
Yeah.
there was this assumption, like I said, just realizing this right now, that people were always for me.
Yeah. That is so true. That is so true, and I think that, so,
I don't
yes,
know
I
I don't know how many
totally,
people live in a world like that.
well, so I think you're right. I think so, that's a big topic right there, but I will say this, and I'll piggyback off that in 2 ways. I totally agree with you, because we could disagree, we could, argue, my immaturities could, impact you, your immaturities could impact
Yeah,
me,
vice versa, could,
and yet
did.
at the end of the day, we we shared this trust, we shared this
Mhm.
love for one another, and this love for Christ, that would say, and in spite of all that, we have this, yeah, mutual trust and love, and because of that, Christ can move in and through us, impact us, move through us, impact other people, and it was really beautiful. Now, I will say this, I think, as we're thinking about creating communities of discipleship and communities of where we can receive from Christ and one another in mutual ways, that this idea of like safety and trust is really important. Because what you were describing, I think at one level is like, I felt safe. And because I felt safe, there was enough shared trust and history that I could slow down to receive, or I could be both upset and I could receive at the same time, so to speak. I could be overwhelmed, but I could also be,
Comforted.
um find peace in the midst of that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's so key. Like, one of the things that we're doing in the wilderness, and one of the things that I'm aspiring to do, and I feel like I am moving towards and doing in my local church, is how do we create like containers, if you want to think of like a container, that is, say, boundaried spaces where people can enter in. There's expectations, there's well, there's boundaries that hold the community up to allow people to enter in with trust, allow people to enter in such a way that they can be transparent, open, vulnerable, and move towards trust with other people. If the communities we're in aren't creating and intentionally thinking about boundaries, or containers of safety and trust, it's going to be really, really hard
Yeah.
to move towards like authentic discipleship, in my opinion, in my experience. But if we can do
Right.
that, wow, we if we can do that, we don't need to be like the facilitator of discipleship. The community itself will
Yeah.
be the vessels of discipleship, the vessels of Christ. And that's beautiful. That's amazing.
It is. It is. And because everybody, like, you can't assume that there's trust. You can't assume
Correct.
any of that, you have to build it. You have to build it from actually an assumption of negative, right? That
Right.
there's something in there to be repaired, and then trust built.
Yeah.
So whether it's with the individuals, or just the placeholders that the individuals have, whether it's with church, whether it's with God, whether it's with,
Hmm.
yeah, past relationships, there's a lot of repair that has to go on first in order to build that.
Yeah.
um but yeah, that's why I'm just like shocked that, oh hey, I definitely understand that now. um
Right.
I didn't come in with that kind of baggage, but maybe that's because we knew each other since we were kids, and that just the family relationship dynamic
I
we're
think that's
building
part of
off
it.
of.
Yeah, I think that's
But
part of it. And
so
you and I have talked about this because I think too, when we can create places and communities that are safe and trustworthy, or that have safety and trust, then we can empower people to take risks. We
yeah,
can empower people to be brave and take risks, to move towards Christ, to move towards these like desires and longings that Christ has put in their heart, that we can move towards like becoming more Christ-like in freedom and life and goodness, rather than, communities that don't create safety and trust, that we can't be brave, then we have to do it out of almost compulsion, or to fit in, or we have to put on masks, and there's so many other things that come into
so many
play.
so many like parting coping mechanisms. You part your soul in order to do that.
Correct, exactly, exactly. And
No good.
that's there's more, we can expand that, there's so much more for us as Christ followers.
Yeah. What did So good. Bro, I always love talking to you. Maybe yeah, we talked about, like, we would just talk all the time.
We would,
It's
all the
it's
time.
been fascinating how much, we've learned together. I think for me, sharing with people what is possible, because I've seen it, learned
Yeah,
it, encountered it, was developed in the community that Strom is a part of. It's a piece of that faith community, the faith community that is initiated by your dad and your uncle, your dad, your mom, your aunt, and uncle, and it's so much bigger than them
yeah,
now, and it's so
yeah.
expansive, and it's such a phenomenal blessing. But if you could go back to, you know, 2004,
Yeah.
2005,
Right, 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 right.
what what do you think your assumptions were around every person being a disciple maker? Did you
Yeah.
even think about it in terms like that, or how did you think
No.
about discipleship as you go back to our baby days?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think back then, I think but certainly I'll speak for myself, but I believe you share this as well. I think we had a belief, or a faith, or a confidence, but it was an unspoken, maybe even unarticulated belief, that really everybody could be a disciple and could make a disciple. Everybody could be a leader at some level. Everybody could have influence. And I mean, I think we just started from that,
Hmm.
and we just, I mean, that was like our working assumption. So if we didn't even state that necessarily explicitly, but
We
if
did
that
it.
were true, then we just assumed at some level that that was a part of every person, that was honestly like a design of every person, that you could be disciple and you could be a discipler. You could be a disciple, make a disciple.
Right, because your dad, the points of light, right? Of course,
Yeah,
everyone's a point of light. There's not like
right,
there wasn't dynamics in those points of light. It was just
right,
peeps, right? Which means everyone is a point of light. There's not a
correct.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus said, I mean, right, go and make disciples. So that was a universal commissioning. It
Yeah.
wasn't like some people were going to go make disciples, or only a few people were going to be qualified enough to make disciples. It was like, no, now you've been disciple, go make a disciple. And he was saying that, as we know, to like a fairly, I mean, honestly, at the time, pretty immature group of people. And he's saying, now go make a disciple. And I'm not saying, oh, we just want to send out immature people to be disciple makers, but I think there's just a tremendous opportunity to empower people and say, hey, Jesus, well, first of all, let's start with the assumption that Jesus deeply loves us. He's with us. He's Emmanuel. He's connected with us. He wants
Hmm.
to be with us. He wants to speak to us. He wants to love us. He wants to minister to us. He's here. And so, how do we connect with Jesus, hear from Jesus, and then, in a sense, like follow what Jesus is asking of us?
Right.
And pretty, in a sense, it's simple. It is simple. It is simple, and everybody can do that. Everybody can do that, and everybody can empower somebody else to do that. And that's what we believe. We believed it back then, and we believe it now. And so now, so then it's just creating opportunities for people to connect with Jesus, hear from Jesus, act on the things that Jesus is putting in their hearts. Already, they're probably already in their hearts. They're
Mm-hmm.
either not aware of them, or they've forgotten them, whatever that may be, and then empowering them to like move towards those things that are already in their hearts that Christ already has in there. And so
Right.
that was our assumption. That was our in a sense working model. And
Right.
so it's
Because
like,
we were that. We
yeah,
we were that. I had training in education and botany and zoophys, zoology, physiology. You had training in classics. Neither of us had
yeah,
formal leadership training, formal Bible
no,
training. Right. We just had wilderness skills
yeah,
and good, a decent heads on our shoulders, I guess.
yeah,
But
yeah,
decent. But
decent.
it's not like we came through a pipeline,
No,
right?
no,
We
no,
we
no,
didn't come through a
no,
developmental pipeline or anything
no.
like that. We were just your dad, like the biggest risk taker I've ever
It's
seen
true.
on people, because he was
Yeah,
always throwing people into like, hey, go lead the trip. He like people
yeah,
could
you can do
die. It's
fine.
like, I trust Jesus. Go.
Yeah, and we're still doing that today. Honestly, we're still doing
Yeah.
that. We just prayed for a group of instructors that are leading one of our 20-day trips. Two of them are leading. They've never led a 20-day trip. And in our lead up to the 20-day trip, I believe we have a culture of where people can show up in such a way that they can show up authentically, um, vulnerably, whatever that looks like for them. And so in the lead up, we were having conversations with one of the leaders in particular, and you could just tell, like he was feeling the pressure, he was feeling the
Mhm.
weight, he was feeling the insecurity of like, how am I going to lead for
Yeah.
20 days? And do I have to? In a sense, he wasn't saying it, but it's like I've been mentored and I've seen so much modeling of all the other instructors that have come before me. And it's like, how do I be them? And
Right.
so we just spent time just processing that and ultimately just praying for him. It's like, hey, you have been uniquely equipped by Jesus and the Holy Spirit to lead in such a way that's unique to you. You don't need to
Right.
be me. You don't need to
Right.
be this person. You don't need to be that person. But you be who Christ has made you to be, and out of the overflow of that, you will have impact. You will impact lives because it's Christ flowing out of you, because you are living and leading in your most authentic, true self. And what I mean by that is the person God has made you to be. So lead from
Right.
that place. Don't be anybody else but that, and people will be impacted. And
Right.
and that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do.
So I try to teach that all over the world, and it's an interesting conversation to have because it's built on so
Mhm.
many different assumptions that people don't actually have. They've been taught other things, right? They've been taught that there's only certain um qualities to leadership. They've been taught that leadership
Mhm.
looks a certain way, that it
Right.
like, and so from for me, I would say that so many leadership pipelines and in dynamics come from a non-kingdom perspective. I'm not saying a
Mm.
bad perspective in that, because I was in the business world for a hot minute, and
Yep.
like it's okay. It doesn't mean it's evil, but it's not kingdom, right?
Right.
And to me, all of that non-kingdom leadership training is really like Saul's armor, because it's
Yeah.
not teaching people to
Wow. Yeah.
lead the version of themselves, right? The
Wow.
leader version
Yeah.
of them,
Wow.
the way that God created them to impact the world out of who, I don't think that God looks at people and go, wow, I really screwed up on that one. I hope they
Right.
work really hard over their life to overcome all the inadequacies I gave them.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I don't think God makes mistakes in the personalities that
Exactly.
he gives us.
Yep.
It's our privilege and life thing to, like, both to experience the redeemed version of that and to lean into
Exactly.
the positive of it. So,
Yes.
question that I have for you, when because nobody taught, I mean, it's not a common paradigm of what leadership is, and yet we had a leadership program. We trained and taught and people for leadership. Where did
Yeah.
some of where did some of those paradigms come for you? So let me just give you like an example. Like, I
Yeah.
remember we were looking at some stuff from Knowles. We were looking at their model of leadership, right? The self leadership, the leadership of
Yeah.
others, the leadership of the group, things
Mhm.
like that. And I remember looking at that. And I think at the same time we had taken the disc and I looked at the Jungian version of leadership, which I fit, but a lot of our staff didn't. And
Mhm.
in talking with some of
Mhm.
our instructors, let's say an Alyssa or a Rachel, and
Right.
they felt inadequate as leaders because they didn't
Right.
fit that archetype.
Right.
And and as I sat with the Lord with that, I was like, well, I know they're called here to do that. Like, that is
Yeah.
clear. And they have
Yep.
amazing things that they can do. So there must be something wrong with the archetype paradigm, right? There must be something wrong with this idea that leadership only looks a certain way. And we started
Yep.
leaning into
Yep.
APEST instead, the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher, that there's leadership versions of each of that, and redefining what that was, what you brought to your responsibility of facilitating and leading a course, apart
Correct.
from a static, predetermined archetype.
Right.
And
Exactly.
that was a pretty big revelation for me, because I fit it, right?
Right.
Josh fit it. I could be alpha. Josh could be alpha.
Right.
And yet that wasn't the rest of everybody, nor
Right.
did it need to
Exactly.
be. And
Exactly.
I felt awful about their insecurities. And I wondered I like started to go, what am I modeling that's wrong here?
Yeah.
What am I imprinting and teaching them that's wrong here, that causes them to doubt themselves, when I know that they're called to be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, that was kind of some of the exploratory uh yeah, learnings around that. Like, maybe what about for you? Like, what was your
Yeah, well,
journey?
I think we would start with the belief or the reality. I would even say it's a reality. It's not just a belief. We would start with the reality that everybody at some level, well, everybody is an image bearer, right? So
Yeah.
everybody bears the image of God. That is to say that they both reflect and could reflect yea more the like attributes of who God is. So everybody can do that. So I think sometimes when we hear like the passages like, well, somebody's the ear and someone's the hand and someone's the foot and someone's the eye and someone's the mouth, of the body of Christ passage, that I think sometimes then we think about that in this paradigm of skills and talents and capacities to do other ministerial. So if I'm the ear, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm the receptionist? And if I'm the hand, does that mean I'm the janitor? But if I'm the mouth, does that mean I'm the pastor? Right. And I think that's fine in part. But I think really what it's saying at some levels, no, everybody has this way by which they can reflect who God is and who
Right.
Christ is in a unique, specific way. There's going to be general ways they can do that, but then also unique and specific ways. And so if we start with that belief in reality, then the process of leadership development is saying, okay, what about Jesse reflects in in a general way, but then in also a really unique and specific way who God is? Because if you can live more fully into how you reflect God and Christ to other people, they will be impacted by that. They
Yeah.
will say, "Oh, I'm
Because of the
seeing
Christ
and
in me.
experiencing God in Jesse."
Exactly. Christ in us.
And Christ in us. And because of that, that's impacting me, that's healing me, that's inspiring me, that's motivating me, that's challenging me, whatever it may be, to become more like Jesus. I want to now, as you reflect the best parts of who God's made you to be to other people, then they say, I want to be more like Christ. I want to discover these things about me, these values, these parts of me, these principles, whatever they may be, that reflect who God is, to share with others. So really, we're trying to, in a sense, like see other people in such a way that what is it about them that uniquely reflects and mirrors the image of God, how God is made, because you're right, God didn't make mistakes. How did God make them? And then empower them to like lead from that place. Now, does that mean in other areas they're going to have to shore up some gaps or shore up some places where like that doesn't feel natural? That doesn't feel like this feels natural. This feels hard. Okay, you're going to have to lean into and grow in some of those areas. But then we really want you to like lean into and like really expand those parts that God made you to be that reflect who he is. And that frees people up to lead. That frees people up to like be empowered to lead in like, I know this is God in me, this is Christ in me. And so that feels so great to lead from that place. And part of it is we're helping them discover that. We're helping them. It's like, hey, we're curious. Like this seems to be a way by which you, like when you lead this way, I sense like God's love. I sense God's affection. I sense God's encouragement. I sense God's hope, whatever that may be. Are you aware of that? Do you sense that when you lead in this way? How does that feel for you? So we're like having these kind of conversations to help them discover that and believe that about themselves. Most people believe, right, they're not doing a good job, they're not
Right.
adequate, they're not capable, they're failing all the time. That's what they believe about themselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's like,
And
no, no,
when,
no, that's not true.
right?
I mean,
Because there's a way that God made you. And when you open up and let the Lord move through that, it's not the absence of you, but it's like the infused, supercharged version of you with like,
yes,
I think of like Captain Marvel, right? You're like, it's you, but with like Holy Spirit juju.
yeah,
And that impacts people in such an amazing way because it's supposed to, right? Because that's
right,
what God did.
right,
And
correct,
so what I love about that and what I've realized since then is that because of that dynamic, right? Because we want you to discover the leadership version of you, gain some skills where you don't have them, right? Gain competencies,
sure,
gain partners, right? Like that you fill the gaps in different kinds of ways, but everyone got that opportunity. So then the leader version of you doesn't have to be compared to anybody else.
correct.
And so as we created the leader of the day, I think that was Josh's baby, like Josh's thing where everyone
Might have been, yeah,
got to
yeah,
practice being a leader of the day. We made them co-leaders. So there
yep.
wasn't like
You
they had
lead
to
in
figure it out,
teams.
right?
You always lead in teams.
Right. And I loved that we just put people in stressful situations to see who they were. Like that was always my fun thing. But I'm masochistic a little bit. And so then they got to be a leader and practice leader version of them, again, without the comparison, without the competition, without the status dynamics, because everyone got to do it.
Yeah,
And so there just wasn't any hierarchy.
yeah,
And so we taught leadership with responsibility, but absence of hierarchy.
yeah.
And the other thing that's been a great learning for me since the Lord has moved me into other spaces is just how extraordinarily rare that is.
Hmm.
And
Wow. Yeah.
yet, we co-led, you, Josh, and I, like the instructors had their
Oh, yeah.
teams, right? Everything was done in teams. And I don't know. I mean,
I
I
know.
reflect
I
on that
know.
a lot. And I'm wondering what your reflections are because
I know.
to
Well,
explore leadership apart from status and hierarchy
yeah.
almost seems contradictory as I say it out loud. And
Yeah.
yet we did
And
it
yet,
every course, every year, now for 40 years, right? I mean,
yeah.
your stint's now 20 something years, but I
Yeah.
won't do math
Yeah.
for you. I won't make you feel old. But um
Right.
what do you reflect on that when you think about that?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty incredible because I mean, just from a biblical perspective, right? Jesus had a model for shared leadership from the beginning.
Yeah.
From the beginning, he had a model
Peter,
of
James,
shared
and John.
leadership.
And then
Yeah,
you trade out which James for for John's brother to Jesus's brother, but you still
right.
have the three pillars of the church, right? Shared leadership.
Absolutely. And then he sends them out by two. Paul's
Hmm.
missionary journey, he always had at least one other person with him. Um, so I mean, so let's just start there. That's Jesus' model for leadership. And even Jesus himself. So some people I think will say, well, Jesus didn't have shared leadership. Yes and no. Yes, he didn't, in that he is the Son of God and he is like the high priest and the apostle of the church and all of those things. And yet he surrounded himself with community and others that he allowed to impact him.
Yeah.
And in some ways, um, yeah, so we'll just say that. So then from there, he said, now have shared leadership. And I think what's so powerful about that, and so many times through the years, I've had people come and say, well, this is the first time I've really ever led with somebody else. Because really, in a
Right.
shared leadership paradigm, not only do the two leaders lead the community, but in a sense, they're having to figure out, how do we lead each other? How do we work together to lead and influence and impact each other? And, so they're like, wow, I've never had to lead a community with another person. That is to say, defer, be mutual, be aware of how my leadership not only impacts the community, but impacts my co-leader. So that's a
Right.
really important dynamic for people to grow in awareness of. And so many times, right? So many times the learning is not just how do the leaders lead the community, but how do the leaders impact each other? There's so much learning there to say. And honestly, we've learned through the years through like guided questions and just reflection of like, you'll have a leader that just leads. They lead. All we hear is their voice, their leadership, their decision making the entire day. And then we'll come to the end of the day and we'll say, hey, what was that like for you to co-lead with that other person? What was that experience like? And it's like, they're like, they don't know what to say. They're like, oh,
Right.
wait, I didn't co-lead.
Oops.
And then we'll ask this person, what was it like to co-lead with this person? And usually it's some sort of dynamic where this person's been a leader their whole lives. They're real assertive. They're real like authoritative, et cetera. And this person's usually not led their whole lives, maybe never. And so they're just used to this person leading. And they'll say something like, oh, it was really good. We had a great day together. Like we co-led so well together. And then we'll say, okay, tell us about your experience with your voice today. When did you
Right.
experience your voice today in leadership? And now they're listening to this reflection, and this person's like, oh, I didn't have a voice today. Oh, I didn't experience my voice at all today. Okay, what was that like to not have a voice today and yet be asked to lead? Now they're hearing that. We're not saying anything about them, but they're just hearing the reflection on this person who actually didn't do any leading today because this person took over.
Just took over.
So then you fast forward a couple more days into the trip. Now maybe they're leading again together. Maybe. Doesn't always happen.
Right.
It's a totally different leadership dynamic because now they're like, oh wow, how do I support your voice? How do we
Right.
co-lead? How do we do this with mutuality? So there's so much learning there. But that's I think the power of shared leadership, because then I can say, then you can reflect back to me back in our early days. Hey, actually, I felt like um, you overstepped my decisions. I said one thing and you said another thing, and we contradicted each other. So it hurt my credibility, or we weren't unified, or whatever that may be.
Or created a lot
And
of confusion for everybody.
or created confusion. Exactly. We didn't have the same expectations. And then I can sit with that and say, yeah, you're right. Or I can sit with that and say, yeah, you're right. And I disagreed with your boundaries. So how can we do that with unity next time? How can we pause, get on the same page, and
Right.
have shared boundaries that we both agree? You know what I mean? So there's so much
Yeah.
learning that we did back then.
Because we had
And
to work it out before we took it public, right? You gotta work it out before you announce to
exactly.
the group.
Exactly. And so then it's like the value of like, hey, let's check in with my co-leader. I'm thinking this, you're thinking this. This is my perspective. This is your perspective. What are you seeing that I'm not seeing? What am I seeing that you're not seeing? Who's struggling? who's not, and then now we have this more fully formed
Right.
leadership dynamic that actually is unified. And it's not me just saying, Jess, we're going to do this. Or it's not you just saying, no, we're going to do this. It's like, no, how do we really like work through this so that we both feel like we have agency and voice, we can be unified. And then that's felt by the group. The group feels
Right.
that. The group
It
feels
always
that in
just
a way that's intuitive and visceral and potentially life changing. So many people through the years, so
mm,
many of our students through the years have said, I've never seen instructors co-lead with one another where there's humility, mutuality, deference, joy, peace,
yeah.
connection, love. Like that, sometimes that's the most impactful thing for people on a course, especially if it's a male female pair.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Oh, we've never seen a male female pair work together with such love and unity and care for us as a community and excellence in their leadership and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's sometimes the most impactful thing. So
Yeah.
it's super powerful,
Yeah. And it's
but it
super
takes
like
intentionality.
stabilizing. Like
Very stabilizing.
I think because of our dynamic, I never felt alone in leadership. I never
Yes,
felt the full
so
burden,
true.
right? I always felt like, whether the metaphor is we're all carrying the evac, person out because, that takes a herd of humans to carry out another person on a stretcher, like when we would practice that, or whether it was swapping leads on climbs and just, understanding that people had strengths and weaknesses, but you just take turns, you just
Yeah,
share it, you share the load because it's
yeah,
a heavy load, you got to share
yeah,
it. I never felt alone in leadership, so
yeah.
much so that every other place that I have led since then, I've built shared leadership
Right. Yep.
because why would I do this alone? Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
It's so true, and I think what I've learned through the years in that is as I've grown and I've matured and I've kind of gone through my own journey, I think the thing we're adding now is if I feel alone,
Mm,
have I built enough safety and trust with you or my co-leader, whoever that may be, or my team and community to say, I feel alone right now. I'm not
yeah,
blaming you. I'm not, this isn't about you. It's just about I'm checking in with myself and I feel alone.
and
And
noticing and naming.
here's another mark of maturity. And I need this.
Yeah,
I need this. That's a lot of people have a hard time with those two dynamics of saying, I feel alone and I need this.
dude, I don't think I learned the I need this part until after
Yeah.
we had
No, that was
not
beef.
we were not
That was
serving
when, yeah, that was a
together.
different season for us. Yeah. That's new for us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah. I'm that might be the last 5 years I can articulate such things,
But why
but
that's so hard is because it's so vulnerable, right? And uh, uh, unfortunately, many leaders are leading alone. There's not shared
yeah,
leadership, and if there is shared leadership,
exactly.
it's hard to create enough safety and trust to be vulnerable. To say, I do feel alone, or I do feel angry, or I do feel scared, and I need this. And have enough boundaries to say, and you don't have to do all of those things for me, and you're not the reason for those things. So we're still together. There's still a togetherness. It's not you're the problem or you're the solution, because then that becomes, codependent and that can get hard
Right,
for people. It's
right,
just we're still differentiated. We're still have boundaries, and yet there's life there to articulate and to share and to be open in such a way that it's healthy. It's life-giving.
right. It helps you become a mature version of yourself, and
Exactly.
that's what I'm just so thankful for, and, I just thankful for you, for our
Likewise.
relationship, and bro, I love you from, like, my bones.
Likewise. I love you and just so appreciate you and all that you're doing. In some ways, I get to be in like like in this space that is, um, the world. I mean, we love the wilderness, but in a space that is um, really, really impactful,
Mhm.
and yet it's not as long term a trajectory as the
Yeah.
spaces that you're really trying to reach and equip and empower. And so I love you, and I so appreciate what God's called you to do because it's so necessary. I'm doing that at a personal level in my local church, but
Yeah.
you're really what I love about you're doing is you're trying to equip leaders in the church and the people of God. So you're kind of doing both
Hmm.
to live out this in such a way that is like long term and in those challenging spaces of life and family and small group and church. So I so appreciate that and admire you and love you and think that's a beautiful calling and with you in that as much as I can be.
You're with me, bro. I'm not alone. I feel it regularly. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for your time. It's the
Yeah.
summer
Thank
when we're
you.
recording this, and you're in the middle in between courses. And man, I just appreciate you so much.
Yeah.
I wish I could
Likewise.
hug you, just give you a squeeze.
Yeah.
But
Blessings. Thanks, Jess.
yeah. Oh, all right. Well, we're praying for the courses. We're praying for the Lord to move in every person's life, in the instructors' lives. And
Amen.
we're trusting that God's going to do amazing things because he
Amen.
just always does.
Yes. So
So,
good.
yeah.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. Amen. Thanks, brother.